And now we bring you the latest on another food safety story about cantaloupe contaminated with deadly listeria. We first reported on the major recall last night, and as of tonight, at least 22 people have now been infected with listeria. 2 have died. As many as 4.5 million cantaloupes may be tainted. And ABC's Jim Avila has more now on what listeria is and how it can kill.
The listeria outbreak has been traced to one of this country's highest quality cantaloupe farms in a place famous for its melons, Rocky Ford, Colorado, at the 4th generation Jensen Farms, where the remaining crop has been destroyed.
We're deeply saddened that there's a possibility that our family's cantaloupe could have gotten somebody sick, and it's very
Right now, those 22 Americans are in 7 states from Colorado to West Virginia, and CDC investigators expect the number to rise since the Jensen Farm cantaloupe has been sold in 17 states.
It's just been pure hell. Devastating, unreal.
Tammy Palmer's husband paralyzed in a Colorado hospital after eating cantaloupe nearly a month ago.
I went over and started patting his face. I'm like, Chuck, what's wrong? And he couldn't talk or anything, so that's when I called 911.
How can this happen in a fruit like cantaloupe, considered safe because of its thick rind?
I'm shocked to hear that there's listeria bacteria on cantaloupe.
The chain of vulnerability begins in the field with waste-contaminated soil or water. It could also come from workers or tools during harvest or on packaging equipment, refrigerators used during storage. Germs on the rind spreading to the flesh of the fruit by your kitchen knife.
The most vulnerable point is when it's been cut.
The problem is cantaloupes are not easy to wash. The nooks and crannies can hide the germs. Melons should be scrubbed before cut and eaten right away. Listeria can grow in the refrigerator, and nearly 25% of all cases lead to death. Jim Avila, ABC News, New York.
The current listeria outbreak in cantaloupes is already being called the 3rd deadliest wave of foodborne illness in U.S. history, even as other foods have been identified as possibly tainted in other ways, in a list that seems to grow daily. Today, there were 2 new voluntary recalls of lettuce and grape tomatoes. Tonight, we talk with one of the country's top food safety litigators about what he simply refuses to eat. Here's ABC's Neil Karlinski.
From listeria-laden cantaloupe to this week's voluntary ground beef recall.
Well, new information coming in on a beef recall.
Keeping up with what is and isn't safe to eat.
Salad lovers, listen up. You may want to check your refrigerator.
Is enough to give you indigestion. If you have a strong enough stomach, pulling up a seat for a meal with one of the nation's top food safety litigators
coleslaw is problematic.
Is an eye-opening way to understand what's on your dinner plate.
BLT, really the only thing at risk here is the tomatoes and the lettuce.
Which is half the sandwich.
It's half the sandwich.
He is a picky eater. I ordered the cheeseburger.
And I hope you ordered it well done.
It's a little pink over here.
It's a little pink.
Would you eat this?
No. There was a recall yesterday of tomatoes. I'm assuming that these aren't part of that recall, but I don't know that.
Attorney Bill Marler has made a fortune suing food producers, retailers, and restaurants for giving hundreds of people everything from E. coli to salmonella to listeria. He now represents more than a dozen people nationwide made sick from eating cantaloupe.
How bad is this cantaloupe outbreak?
As of yesterday, it became the 3rd most deadliest foodborne illness outbreak that has ever occurred in the United States. It's pretty stunning.
He didn't expect food safety to be a career when he took a case representing people allegedly made sick from eating Jack-in-the-Box hamburgers in 1993.
It looks like an Arkansas case has been confirmed.
Since then, the cases have rolled in by the dozens, making Marler one of the leading voices on food safety.
I think this thing's going to get out of control.
And he puts his stomach where his mouth is. His own menu never, ever includes ground beef or turkey. No bag salad, no matter what. No raw oysters, no unpasteurized juice or milk, and never, ever any sprouts.
I have a different perspective on hamburger than I think most people do.
His teenage daughters have grown up without ever tasting a hamburger.
My view is ultimately it is the manufacturer, it's the shipper, it's the retailer that is selling us food, that they have an obligation to make sure the food that they're selling us is as free of pathogens as humanly possible.
Chew on this for a minute. Food safety funding for the meat inspectors at the USDA is facing a 3.4% cut next year, while the FDA is being hit with a 10% bite, which could mean 600 fewer inspectors at farms and factories. But with less money to use on inspectors and lab tests, the question isn't just whether we can rely on our government to keep us safe, but should we?
To the extent that government says that it's in control, there's a false sense of security created among consumers. But consumers are the ones who have to be on the lookout, who have to demand information, and that's how they're going to keep the food industry accountable.
One company that isn't waiting for the federal government's help is Costco. The national retailer is taking on the cantaloupe crisis itself and may now set its own standards for how melons are grown, cleaned, and handled after they're picked. They may even require suppliers to test their melons to ensure that they're safe to ship. Craig Wilson is Costco's food safety director.
I think that we can do better. At least we can have a really strong feeling for what we're putting out and good knowledge for what goes on the sales floor.
And Costco is looking to do the same with other foods. Consider this, since 2009, there have been outbreaks involving everything from peanut butter to eggs, strawberries, even cookie dough. And it turns out Costco is one of the best positioned to deal with recalls. Since every purchase is tied to a customer's membership ID, the company actively reaches out and contacts everyone who's purchased a newly recalled item, something a typical supermarket can't do.
We call them, we tell them exactly what's going on, and tell them not to eat the item, not to use the item, return it to Costco immediately for a full refund, or give them some remedy.
Back at the lunch table with Marler, he cautions the problem of tainted food is mainly for the very old, the very young, and very pregnant. But that happens to be a lot of people.
Now, people die, we all will, but you shouldn't die from eating cantaloupe. It's just not the way you should go. You shouldn't die from eating food. You shouldn't die from having a meal with a friend. It just shouldn't be that way.
I'm Neil Karlinski for Nightline in Seattle.
The owners of a Colorado cantaloupe farm were arrested Thursday on charges stemming from a 2011 listeria epidemic that killed 33 people. Federal prosecutors said brothers Eric and Ryan Jensen were arrested on misdemeanor charges of introducing adulterated food into interstate commerce. Prosecutors said federal investigators determined the Jensens didn't adequately clean the cantaloupe. The 2011 listeria outbreak was one of the nation's deadliest involving foodborne illness. The FDA has said the melons were likely contaminated in Jensen Farms packing house. It concluded that dirty water on a floor and old, hard-to-clean equipment probably were to blame. The CDC said people living in 28 states ate the contaminated fruit. The Jensens could each face up to 6 years in prison if they're convicted on all counts against them. Noel Waghorn, The Associated Press.
A court in Denver decides the fate of 2 Colorado cantaloupe farmers blamed for a deadly outbreak of listeria. And despite strong objections from some of the victims' families, those farmers will spend no time behind bars.
Investigator Rick Sounder has followed this case from the start for us. He has our top story from federal court tonight. Rick, the brothers will not go to jail.
That's correct, Sharon. Magistrate Judge Michael Hegarty made it clear it was more important for the brothers to work to pay back their victims than to spend time behind bars. The Jensen brothers walked away from one of America's worst foodborne illness outbreaks as free men. First Ryan, then his brother Eric. No jail as some family members of victims wanted. Penny Hauser stood outside the courthouse with a picture of her husband Michael after asking the magistrate to lock up the farmers.
Because I think the Jensen brothers should feel the isolation that our family has felt for the last 2 years by not having our father, husband, grandfather.
The outbreak killed at least 33 people and sickened nearly 150 others. Prosecutors said the brothers had no evil intent and did not mean to harm anyone. Besides probation, the brothers will each have to serve 6 months home detention, community service, and pay $150,000 in restitution.
I don't think that's any kind of a financial ruin to them of the death and destruction that they caused.
Paul Schwartz lost his father, who is from Kansas City. At the hearing, the Jensen brothers each expressed their regrets to the victims.
This has been a huge tragedy for everyone involved, and we are very, very sorry. To the victims and
your families, I'd like to extend my most sincere apologies and deepest regrets for this tragic event.
The Jensens avoided jail by cooperating with the government, including meeting with the victims. Would you like to express apologies at this time?
Frankly, say what we did earlier.
Thank you. The Jensens are now suing a company that inspected their packing system and gave them a high rating just before the outbreak occurred. One of the Jensen's attorneys said the cruel irony is that all this happened because the brothers were trying to improve their cantaloupe cleansing system. Both sides called this an American tragedy.
Saving at Furniture Row is a slam dunk.
CBS 4 News.
Thanks, Rick.